We might begin. Thank you. When Kim Williams was appointed CEO of News Limited a year ago this month, a marvellous picture appeared in The Australian, from memory on the front page of the business section. It was a picture in the finest traditions of newspaper photojournalism. Two blokes in suits staring into the camera, each one clutching a pot of beer, or whatever they call a pot of beer in Sydney. As I was drinking in this image of Kim Williams and the man he was succeeding, John Hartigan, a colleague observed, "Harto looks like he was born with a beer in his hand. Williams looks like he's having his first." While I wouldn't dare insult our distinguished guest by giving credence to such an un-Australian, unjournalistic slur, I did read somewhere that he raised eyebrows by asking for a wine list during a corporate outing to the footy. Kim Williams is not your conventional Australian media boss, and at a time when new thinking, new approaches and a willingness to break with the stereotypes of our industry is essential if our great newsrooms are to survive, let alone prosper, in the brave new world of digital, at a time when the threat of government regulation of the media looms large, that is something to cheer. It seems Kim Williams did not grow up with a burning ambition to be a media power broker. After achieving early celebrity as a teenage Lego champion, he won a Commonwealth Scholarship to Sydney University, where he chose to study music and pursue a career as a composer. And so he did, spending time in Italy before becoming a lecturer in music at Sydney Conservatorium. His first corporate job was as general manager of at Musica Viva, where he rose to become managing director. He then took the same role at the Australian Film Commission before running TV production house Southern Star and winding up at the ABC. But the arts has remained his first love. He was foundation chairman of the Australian Film Finance Corporation and has been chairman of the Sydney Opera House since 2005. In the decade before his appointment as CEO of News Limited, Kim Williams ran Foxtel, where he proved people will pay for digital content they want, taking the pay TV operator from humble origins to great profitability. As a corporate leader, he has been described variously as intellectual, egotistical, hard-nosed, well-connected, secretive, savvy, a micromanager, a genius. Whichever of these boxes are ticked, he commands widespread respect for his energy, ambition and success. And in the intensely challenging world of mainstream media, he has demonstrated himself to be quietly confident when many others are pessimistic, astute when others have been bullheaded, strategic when others have been stubborn, and focused when others have been painfully slow to react to the runaway train of change bearing down on us all. He's been a forceful and articulate advocate against tighter government media regulation in the wake of the Finkelstein inquiry, warning of the risk of a star chamber. Who, he said, determines anti-government bias in a democracy? He said in last month's Ian Smith lecture. It is a serious issue requiring serious and persistent resistance. And he has declared himself very, very confident that effective paywalls can build and sustain good journalism into the future. What more could we want to hear? Please welcome Kim Williams.
Thanks, Mark. I think I might make no comment on that very generous introduction. You can form your own conclusions on the checklist. Members of the Melbourne Press Club, ladies and gentlemen, if I was asked to sum up in a single word what the media profession needs more of today, my answer would be optimism. Our job in the media industry is ultimately about storytelling, so let me start with a story, a somewhat dismaying one for all of us, which was related to me recently. It involved a hard-bitten senior newspaper sub-editor offering insights and advice to a recent journalism graduate hunting for his first full-time job. To cut to the chase, the insight was that there's no future in journalism, and the advice was that he should be realistic and seek a different career, quickly. In other words, give up all hope. To which the tyro responded by saying that he'd in fact already given up and was actively searching for jobs in corporate PR. Now, this was particularly disheartening to hear because for that young man, as for many young people, journalism was the profession of his dreams. Everyone knows in their heart of hearts what they really want to do when they grow up. And for him, it was to be a great reporter. What's tragic about this isn't that he failed to achieve the dream. After all, millions of boys' dreams of playing Test cricket for Australia, but few ever do. The tragedy lies in the fact that he's been so comprehensively discouraged before he's even had the chance to have his talent tested. What I think this represents is an example of something that is now infecting too much talk about our industry, what I would call declinism, the loss of hope, the lack of will to participate in necessary change. Perhaps for the old hands like our sub-editor, who have witnessed unparalleled changes to their industry, such a view is understandable. After all, right now, in a time of global recession and major industry restructuring, there have been unfortunate redundancies. And there was indeed a lot to love about the journalism of the old days, or at least the romantic image of it, which we tend to confuse with the more prosaic reality. You see it wonderfully portrayed in movies like All the President's Men and The China Syndrome, with their clanking printing presses and broadcast facilities that resemble a NASA mission station. There will inevitably always be a certain longing to recapture the Ed Murrow moment, as Aaron Sorkin has attempted in The Newsroom, the second season of which airs exclusively on Foxtel's Soho channel next year. I got the plug in, I promise no more. But we can't live in the past, and we should never say to a young person, "Don't get your hopes up." The fact is, to paraphrase Murrow's famous claim, that good journalism made television more than just wires and lights in a box. In the digital age, good journalism makes digital devices more than just zeros and ones in different sized boxes. My advice to the aspiring journalist in my story would have been the opposite. Have a go, because there's plenty of energetic life in the media industry yet. In fact, I would say there's much more cause for hope than for pessimism. Journalism of the future is going to be different, but it is still recognisably going to be journalism. And it's going to create jobs for those who approach it with a positive attitude and are prepared to make a place for themselves in it. Why do I say this? Well, for one very simple reason. My reading of what's going on is that the digital world is massively increasing the world's demand for words and images that make sense of our world. The good news is journalists and media proprietors are in precisely this business. There's a lot of despair about the impact of technology, especially iPads and the like, on journalism. For me, despite the regrettable short-term pain, it's actually a reason for very real optimism. I say, look at it positively. Consumption is up, and up dramatically. The commitment to word and images delivery and the geniuses who invented the computer and tablet devices like the iPad have given us a compelling, for many quite addictive, new distribution network, but only if we recognise it as such and do not see it as a threat. The really positive fact we should keep in mind whenever the urge to declinism overtakes us is that, as I said before, people are now consuming more news and analysis across more devices than ever before at any time in human history. I'm not saying that smartphones and tablets and the inspired inventors and entrepreneurs who have promoted them have made life easy for us. Far from it. But they provide us with marvellous ways to engage with this new world. And from my point of view, as a media CEO who proved, along with a great team at Foxtel, that digitisation can be turned into a huge positive, I know there are lots of reasons to work hard and to be optimistic. The challenge, of course, is to adjust, get product offerings right, get cost structures right, attract new customers and create revenue streams that can sustain great journalism. It's my firm belief that this does not in any way imply a dumbing down of our profession, as some occasionally suggest. With all this growing global demand for the words and images we produce, it will always be possible to take good journalism to customers in a financially sustainable way. The exact nature of the way we will do this has yet, frankly, to be fully determined, and there is still a lot to learn from consumers as the market, in its infinite wisdom, will be the arbiter of this. But it will likely do so through a combination of the anachronistic and the futuristic that will surprise us all. Personally, I think the broad parameters of the new business model for the media and journalism can already be surmised. So let me outline 5 major points that I think give us cause to be hopeful and provide a useful set of parameters from which to sustain an optimistic view. My first point is a prediction which, given numerous historical precedents, shouldn't really surprise us, but still sometimes does. The printed newspaper will be here for a good while yet. It may not comprise the whole newspaper market as it once did, but it will remain vitally important because consumers like it. News Limited alone sells more than 11 million newspapers every week, and we distribute an additional 5 million community papers each and every week. Together, our Sunday newspapers are read by at least 5 million people every Sunday. To put that in perspective, particularly here, 3.2 million people watched last year's AFL Grand Final, or this year's I should say, between Hawthorn and the Sydney Swans. Lewis will guarantee that was the number. That's one weekend per year. We do consistently better than that, 52 weekends per year, with fabulous reader engagement. The fact is, when it invented the iPad, Apple did not uninvent paper. Many people continue to love printed newspapers. Despite being an early adopter of the iPad and an absolute devotee of online publications, I still regard a crisply printed newspaper as a thing of great utility, even beauty, and certainly a total pleasure to read. And over 11 million weekly buyers suggest I'm not alone. It is, after all, a very user-friendly technology and a great way to read fine journalism, and for advertisers to have a very real impact. One of those who agrees is the journalistic genius, the marvellously opinionated Mayor of London and possible future Prime Minister of Britain, Boris Johnson. When it was revealed recently that business strategists at The Guardian had discussed the possibility of axing the paper's print edition, Boris's reaction was the one that even those who dismiss him as a Tory buffoon would probably agree with. He wrote, and I quote, "Don't do it. It would be a national tragedy if we lost the paper version, the wood, pulp and ink version of this historic publication. It's no use telling us that the content will all be there online. Everything is online. We need the Guardian glowering at us from the newsstands in all its high-mindedness. We need to see people nodding over it gently on the tube. Take it online and you lose all political impact. You lose the vital editorial marshalling of the often excellent journalists and cartoonists and photographers into a single daily statement, a single product." And he, along with your speaker today, is one of the Guardian's critics. I suspect that that type of analysis will remain relevant for some time to come. When we see that doomed institution, the cinema, thriving, 2 generations after the invention of the VHS cassette, we know that human beings' decisions do not necessarily move in a linear direction along with technology. I therefore say to our discouraged young journalist, not only shouldn't you give up hope of seeing yourself or your words on a screen, you shouldn't give up seeing your words and your photo byline on a printed page. The end of the newspaper may indeed be coming, but it's not possible to say with certainty that the iPad will bring down the printed mastheads the way a giant meteorite brought down the last of the dinosaurs. The extinction of the printed page is not a given. It's true, though, that even should our young tyro get a job in print, it's going to be a different job from those that were available to print journalists 20 years ago. Journalism is evolving in line with technological change. And this leads me to my second point. The smartest young journalists and the most adaptable veteran journalists are inventing the future of journalism and carving out great careers for themselves. There's no secret to this. After all, it wasn't that long ago that we were asking them, as 10-year-olds, to record programs for us. They get technology. They've grown up with it. They get it, not just technically, but socially. They understand how it can entertain, how it can enlighten, how it can generate revenue, and sometimes how it can change the world. Take a new generation of journalists represented by News Limited's own Peter Van Onselen and Jessica Irving. They make their names writing books. They break stories in print. They blog online. They tweet. They even host or star on TV programs and do it incredibly well, fluently, winning awards in the process. The same is evident with some of our great sports writers, such as Mike Sheehan and Mark Robinson at the Herald Sun. Both were early adopters of radio, appear on Fox Sports' On the Couch and AFL 360 programs, and file online as well as broadcasting online. All this is not to say that there is no place for great long-form sports writing. Just look at the marvellous evocative pieces that Gideon Haigh has recently written on the cricket. It's not just the young or sports journalists doing these sorts of things. Paul Kelly, for instance, has been doing it for decades. Paul writes columns and books that record our political, economic and social history with thunderous authority. He appears on Sky News and elsewhere. He's a frequent guest on radio, and he is also found on our digital sites. Our world is constantly changing, and in any professions, the veterans who survive the longest are the ones smart enough to foresee and react to and move with trends. These journalists, and too many more to mention, are at what you might call the more traditional end of the market. More out there are people like Joe Hildebrand with his popular commentary and his hosting of programs like Dumb, Drunk and Racist. Outside News Limited, there are others like Annabelle Crabb with her popular tweets and programs like Kitchen Cabinet. It's easy to dismiss this sort of thing as light entertainment, but it's anything but. The subject matter is serious. What, after all, could be more serious than examining the nature of contemporary racism and the reaction of our young Indian neighbours to it? To cut it in the Asian century, we're going to need a lot more Joe Hildebrands. While the methods these new journalists employ may be innovative, their content is both thought-provoking and informed by the old-fashioned journalistic crafts of investigation and interrogation. The kitchen, it turns out, can sometimes be more revealing than the interview studio. And they're doing all this in a way that attracts people who may not otherwise think much about politics, and in the process attracting them to the media, encouraging them to think about their democracy, and also, in Joe's case, generating advertising revenue to boot. But more than this, many of our journalists have moved towards a completely different way of interacting with their audiences. Journalists are no longer the gatekeepers and purveyors of unimpeachable wisdom. They now hold a conversation with their readers through the marvellous medium of digital technologies, changing in quite profound ways what it is that we all do. News.com.au is a strong example of what I'm talking about. What these young people and veteran reporters are doing is proving that quality journalism is not dying. It is simply evolving into something different, and I'd suggest possibly better. Our strategy as media decision makers should be to back them and see the trend as our friend. We must also ride with a wider set of delivery and engagement methods with the diverse audiences of our nation. Whether it's via print, TV, the web or on a mobile device, each delivery method has a different personality and different consumer requirements, just as each consumer has different preferences for the way in which they consume their news and opinion and the format they like on each device. So my third point is the consumer must always be at the centre of all we do. In fact, the very nature of digital technologies now being invented has shifted power forever from producers to consumers with remarkable speed. Digital recorders like Foxtel's IQ, Internet Protocol TV, web-based catch-up TV services, vodcasts, podcasts, online newspapers and Twitter are all allowing consumers to determine what, when and how they consume. And they're enabling consumers to participate in creating media stories themselves. The impact of the digital revolution on the media is already massive and going to get very much bigger. The Boston Consulting Group tells us that by 2016, the internet economy will comprise at least $4.2 trillion in the G20 economies. Online retail will also comprise 8.9% of total retail at an average of more than $2,300 per online user. And online advertising will comprise up to 34% of all advertising. The rivers of gold of the old classified print days may have contracted, but advertisers are still showing that they will go where our readers and viewers are. I know that we can create new revenue sources from the digital world because I see it each and every day. And like every other smart media company, News Limited will continue over time to manage advertising efforts between print and other diverse delivery technologies to employ an ever more consumer-connected approach. To achieve success in this very complex delivery and invention world, to sustain and deliver a new future for journalism, we have to ensure the consumer is the central focus of all efforts as never before. These consumer preferences are obviously going to have profound implications as to how we in the media organise resources and construct and manage our infrastructure for sustainable financial outcomes. There's a lot of talk around about so-called eyeballs and paywalls. I have to say it's not language that I like. It treats people as one-dimensional and suggests that we are somehow erecting barriers to people enjoying our product. Indeed, it always struck me that the reaction from too many journalists and commentators to the Wall Street Journal's introduction of a subscription model in 1997 was overly hysterical, much too cynical, and ultimately self-defeating. To some degree, the descriptor of pay war, with all that implies about keeping people out, is, in my view, a manifestation of this. I mean, think about it just for a moment. Do you hear supermarkets calling their checkout stations the paywall? Of course you don't. I know other publications take a different view to charging. The Guardian, infused as it is with woolly belief in what it calls an open internet, and buttressed, as is often forgotten, by a large financial charitable endowment, believes their product should be free. But as their current financial troubles show, I'm pleased to say, there are deep problems with the model. The fact is that good journalism costs money. End of story. We have to find ways to make it pay in a digital world. And in doing this, we are not locking up consumers or repelling them with walls or being untrue to some universal declaration that says everything on the internet should be free. It's about turning our readers and viewers into valued customers and members of our media community. It's above all about getting people to subscribe to content by ensuring it is of the highest quality, focused on their individual interests and delivered in a format that suits them. It's hardly controversial that consumers should pay for things they value and want. Again, ultimately, it's about putting consumers at the absolute centre of all that we do, in ways that are commercially sustainable. So we will persist with the strategy of charging people for our journalism. We do it today with the Australian and the Herald Sun. We will next year do it with our other mastheads. One of our traditional competitors recently announced it is also going to charge for digital access for its key mastheads. I do not pretend that charging for digital subscriptions will all be plain sailing. After all, newspaper companies have given their digital product away for close to 15 years. It was a misjudgment. Repricing our products to reflect their value and to recoup costs with a reasonable return on capital is going to take time. The other marvellous challenge in putting customers first in today's world is that each print and digital medium has different personalities. They are engaged with at different times of the day, in different ways and often by different audiences. This means we need to apply new ways of presenting what we do across different devices while ensuring highly efficient back-office systems. In many ways, I see similarities with television. The arrival of subscription delivery on cable, satellite and over the internet has enabled storytellers to tell stories in entirely new ways. This has led to what many people call a new golden age of television, with the development of truly remarkable series such as The Wire, The Sopranos and Boardwalk Empire, and the beautifully rendered six-part Cloud Street based on Tim Winton's book. Consumer connection has been remarkably strong worldwide. I don't want to overstretch the analogy, but I do think, as a glass-half-full kind of guy, that all that the new digital mediums, with new subscription models and engaged audiences with new expectations, will mean that we find different ways of telling yarns, new ways of engaging customers across different devices. For the bold, the talented and the connected, this can only be a great thing, the chance to pioneer in a new space supported, in our case, by a company with good revenue streams and an absolute journalistic commitment. This brings me to my fourth point. Rendering the media for the digital age requires a clear vision, strategy and plan. It requires understanding new technologies, applying new controls to cost structures, managing new opportunities for advertising and other forms of revenue generation, such as different payment models. It also requires fresh commitment to and management of major investment streams. It is not for the faint-hearted, nor those of ephemeral commitment. This is already underway at News Limited. Largely out of sight of our customers, we have been quietly restructuring our business to put a new approach in place. Such changes include the implementation of a new editorial technology backbone, which will make our journalism fully accessible across all of our products, as well as the creation of a new 7-day news desk approach to managing journalism. More visible to our customers is our subscription for content strategy. We were the first to announce this in Australia, and others will inevitably follow. It has been shown to work overseas, most stunningly at the Wall Street Journal, which, along with its other digital products, now has 1.3 million subscribers. And the early evidence suggests that it's bearing fruit here also, although of course on a far smaller scale and from a lower and later starting point. In November, our online masthead, The Australian, had 31,241 subscribers, audited in accordance with the Audit Bureau's circulation rules. Another 10,000 or so 6-day print subscribers had also taken up the offer of an included digital pass. This represents strong growth, up 16% over the last 6-month period. And this is just part of the story, because we have huge engagement from our digital subscribers who spend 4 times longer on the Australian site than other visitors and 3 times longer on our mobile site than other visitors. Overall, almost 8 million individual people visit our digital websites each month, many of them many, many times, which creates very big numbers indeed. This is working, and we intend to continue to develop and improve our digital products in line with our customers' expectations and feedback. We also, naturally enough, intend to develop superb new mobile offerings. We will also continue to build our leadership in key categories that deeply engage consumers, such as food, parenting, business and sports. And importantly, we will continue improving our exceptionally strong print offerings also. One thing our customers will definitely notice is the new content that will flow from the integration into our product suite of important new business purchases. Our recent acquisition of Consolidated Media Holdings, for instance, now gives our other media units much greater access to the content of Fox Sports. Our business readers and viewers now have access to Business Spectator and the Eureka Report through our purchase of those wonderful assets. My point here is that these acquisitions provide News Limited with the sort of synergies and programming integration across our products and services that will be the very stuff of sustainable digital media futures in the decades to come. And that's not all. Our purchase of a significant minority shareholding in Seek Asia, as well as Foxtel's completion of the Ozstar merger, will further strengthen our revenue base and digital knowledge. All up, News Limited has made several $1 billion of new investments. We're creating a media company that is well structured across diverse technologies. This will position us to lead in the digital age and to provide a base for the continuance of the great profession of journalism into the future. Media companies need the freedom to continue this process of business re-engineering and to take advantage of digital possibilities. And this brings me to my fifth and final point. The market must not be limited by unnecessary regulation. At this moment in history, the media industry simply must not be constrained from marshalling its resources to meet this challenge. But inappropriately, in my opinion, this is exactly what governments are contemplating doing. If there is to be a strong future for journalism, we must head this off. I quoted Boris Johnson earlier, so let me quote him again. It seems incredible, he writes, that we are proposing new regulation for the traditional forms of media just when they are facing the biggest threat to print since Gutenberg invented it. Again, Boris is right. Australian analysts agree with him. Writing in The Australian on the 9th of October, former Associate Commissioner of the Productivity Commission, Stuart Simpson, said, and I quote, "Rarely has there been such a disconnect between the business imperatives of an industry sector and the politics of Canberra. The federal government should be orchestrating a regulatory environment that provides more, not less, flexibility, and so gives our media sector the best opportunity to remain viable. In a cross-platform media marketplace, consolidation efficiencies of scale, and in many instances actual concentration of media ownership, will be critical to survival." This is the reality we are dealing with when it comes to processes like the Finkelstein and Convergence reviews. They propose two major changes to the Australian media which should be strongly resisted. First, the creation of a government-funded Statutory News Media Council. We oppose this on a number of grounds. It's government-funded and therefore open to government control. It does not have to publish reasons for its decisions. Its decisions cannot be appealed to bodies like the AAT, and it could seek to jail or fine journalists and media executives for non-compliance with its rulings. There are other versions of Finkelstein floating around, such as bestowing on the minister or a government body the power to force media companies to join the Press Council and empowerment to approve policies of that body. We also oppose this vigorously, as it's a de facto form of licensing and controlling journalism. Let's all remember that journalism from companies like mine operates under no government licensing regime, uses no public resources, and requires, to do its job properly, freedom to operate within the confines of the general common law and then specific competition, corporations and libel law and many other pieces of legislation to boot. It's axiomatic to its operation that freedom of speech is unchallenged. The second policy proposal we disagree with is the highly subjective public interest test on decisions relating to media ownership. The stated aim of such a test is to preserve media diversity. Bollocks. We oppose it, as does every other major media company in Australia. The strikes against it are extensive. First, it is unnecessary as the market is delivering unprecedented levels of media diversity. There are now 16 free-to-air channels, over 200 channels on Foxtel, including 14 independent news channels, thousands of blogs that Australians access, and with smartphones, you literally have the world's news and opinion diversity in the palm of your hand. Second, it is vague and subjective and will likely be subject, sadly, to inevitable political interference. History is our guarantor. Third, it is unnecessary as the ACMA already has powers to enforce diversity. Further, the ACCC also has powers to block mergers that it thinks are anti-competitive, which has the effect of preserving ownership diversity. Fourth, the so-called public interest test will add another layer of complexity to merger and acquisition activity, slow down the process of getting merger approvals and lead to a cooling of much-needed investment in our sector. Together, both these reviews threaten to diminish the freedom of the press because they would limit the capacity of journalists to stand up to the abuse of power by politicians, bureaucrats and business people. So Finkelstein would potentially open up journalists to prosecution, fines and even imprisonment, and the Convergence Review's public interest test would open the possibility of politicians interfering where they should not, duplicate existing powers, increase uncertainty and reduce investment. It all adds up to unprecedented levels of censorship and control. As the London-based Stephen Hornsby wrote earlier this year, this would, quote, give Australia perhaps the most comprehensive panoply of media restrictions in the world. It's time to ask, do we really need Canberra-appointed retired judges padding their superannuation income with part-time jobs on new regulatory bodies when it's young people in their 20s who know what the real answer to media bias is? Campaigns on social media, sites like Facebook and Twitter. They help topple dictatorships in the Middle East. They're not afraid to serve it up to shock jocks, and they played a big role in gaining the recently created Royal Commission into child sex abuse. Today, a young person fearlessly practising freedom of speech represents a far more democratic and preferable form of media regulation than any well-meaning retired judge interpreting a subjective book of rules aimed at something approaching gentleman's club etiquette. In conclusion, then, I feel confident that the idealism and ambition of the young about the future of journalism is spot on. Nothing can hold the media back. The declinism one hears so often in our industry is bound to be overwhelmed by society's thirst for news and analysis, and by the irrepressible energy of a new generation of media players who are going to take their profession in new and incredibly exciting directions in the digital age. Sure, the media and journalism will look different, but that doesn't mean it will be worse. Every generation sees a golden age in decline when the real story is a new golden era coming into being. I guarantee you, while sadly it won't be long until the great press gallery names of our era retire, or at least I should say of my era retire, they will be replaced by a new generation just as motivated to maintain journalism as one of the great professions for anyone to aspire to. It's up to the old hands like me not to talk our industry down, but to build a platform that will allow the young to create this future durably through secure connection with diverse audiences. The shape of that platform isn't yet certain, but it's being shaped already and it will work. I and other media players are certain of it. At News, we are launching a whole new enterprise built on that very confidence. Thank you.
Time is quite tight, but we have an opportunity, I think, for a few questions. We do give precedence to working journalists. If you could please, where appropriate, give your name and organisation. There's a roving mic as well. Jim.
Thank you. Jim Clark, writer. Thank you for your optimism about the future of print journalism. I'm sure everybody in this room will be delighted. I do note, however, that Fairfax is concentrating on digital and in the very near future is going to change the format of the Age, which probably will put it on more of a head-to-head confrontation with the Herald Sun. Many observers, including, I believe, Rupert Murdoch, says that Melbourne is evolving towards a one-newspaper city. Can you please tell me what you think the life of the Age is? Will it survive?
Look, I have no idea. I obviously spend all of my time thinking about the publications that we run and the diverse products that we produce. I think the competition that will arise from the Age going into a tabloid format is something that I and my colleagues relish, and we intend to have a good old-fashioned competitive dust-up. And you know who the winners will be? Consumers.
Hi. Is this on? Jess Gardner from the Financial Review. Just wondering if you can let us know what the effect of the demerger of News Corp will have on the local operations, and also if you could give us a bit of a rundown of what you think of the current state of the advertising market is, with particular focus on the printed publications and the digital publications.
Well, clearly people are going to have a lot more ability to scrutinise the performance of our print assets than they have in recent years in terms of the attention, because most attention has been on the entertainment assets of the News Corporation. In terms of the advertising markets and the direction of those advertising markets, we're in a tough time. And I think together with my broadcast colleagues, we are all living through a very difficult set of circumstances. There is a pronounced consumer gloom in Australia at the moment, and that has reflected itself in a downturn in consumption patterns and has been reflected in a very significant, abrupt interruption into advertising markets that has been realised over November, December. Now, we're all hopeful of some bounce, but at the moment I don't think any of us in truth are seeing much of it, and we await it with keen anticipation. So I suppose it's nothing that a bit of invention won't get moving.
Kath Hurley from ABC Local Radio. The Herald Sun and the Daily Telegraph have very different views of the world, and I'm just interested in why you think that the Herald Sun, I guess, is more successful than its Sydney counterpart.
Oh, I think there's a long history of divergent operations inside news across Australia in terms of our different products. And there are many differences between cities, consumption habits in cities, distribution patterns in cities, demographics in cities, and demographics in readership. Clearly the Herald Sun has probably one of the greatest mid-market newspapers anywhere in the English-speaking world, and it has always had a unique intensity of connection with the community of Melbourne and Victoria in a wholly desirable way. I think any editor across the country would love to have that sustained level of connection. It's something to look at in wonder and to celebrate. It has a foundation of another very strong thing that is central to the experience of Victoria, and that is the AFL. And the Herald Sun has always celebrated the AFL in a way that I think is pretty unique in terms of any publication in Australia, particularly in terms of the level of, whilst it can be intense in its scrutiny of the game, it has a marvellous respect for the game and all of the community that surrounds the game. And I think that's a very special thing. Probably unique in publications across the English-speaking world as far as I can tell. And it's part of that unique personality that informs the Herald Sun. The Daily Telegraph is much more a spirited creature of Sydney, and it has a much more kind of cheeky, robust, fractious relationship with its community, and that results in very different outcomes. It also has now vigorous coverage in a pretty intense way of 3 football codes, because it's always had 2 in rugby union and rugby league. And now AFL, of course, with the Swans having won 2 premierships in recent years, it just has to pay attention to AFL. Now, the Herald Sun is respectful of rugby league and rugby union, but it's more in a, oh, if we have to mode, and I know all my Herald Sun colleagues are going to hit me, but it's the truth. Whereas in the Telegraph's case, they have to. They really have to. And it makes it more difficult.
Kim, you mentioned... Oh, sorry, Peter Bartlett, Minter Ellison. You mentioned media regulation, and I think most people in the room would agree with your comments. The other issue that apparently Senator Conroy is looking at is the potential of a statutory tort of privacy. We know that there have been a number of unfortunate publications over the last couple of years, but very few in number compared to the UK, for example. Can you comment on whether we should have a statutory tort of privacy?
I don't think we should. I think there's more than ample avenues under existing law for the citizenry to assert their rights. I think any statutory tort of privacy can only be used in a ignoble fashion by those in positions of power, influence, or frankly, public celebrity in a way that is contemptuous of the rights of the general community. I thought Mark Day published a really good piece in The Australian about this on Monday, and I really encourage you all to look at it. Of course, it's online. Online's forever, so you can all go there and look at it as soon as you get back to your offices, when the majority of online consumption of our products takes place, in the boss's time.
I think we maybe do one more if there's a last question. Bill.
Bill Birnbauer from Monash. You mentioned the AFL, which prompted in my mind a recollection that the AFL is employing now 40, I think, odd journalists for its own reporting of the AFL. Do you see this as a challenge to the Herald Sun, and do you regard what they do as journalism?
Oh, that's a difficult... I'm on the record of always being deeply loving of my colleagues at the AFL, and I always studiously avoid the issue of AFL media whenever I meet with Andrew Demetrio, and I mean I studiously avoid it. I'd back our coverage of the AFL any day over the AFL's coverage of the AFL. I think it speaks for itself.
Kim, thank you very much once again, and thank you all for coming.